What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Imagine for a second that the world is actually ending. I'm talking total annihilation. Half the kingdoms on the planet have been wiped off the map. The legendary hero is literally dead, and the remaining kings are so scared they've run out of wine just trying to cope with the stress. But then, humanity comes up with one final desperate plan to survive. Are they building a superweapon? No. Are they training a new army? Nope. They are sending a bribe. Today we are diving into a brand new fantasy series where the daughter of a duke, Cecilia Reijou, is forced into a political marriage with the literal demon king to secure a truce. But guys, there is a massive catch. Cecilia was told she had to charm the king to save the world, but nobody mentioned that the demon king is actually a beautiful woman with a serious tentacle problem. And if that wasn't enough, her new home is filled with murderous subordinates, a seductress who was supposed to be executed, and a maid who is so obsessed with her queen that she's ready to kill Cecilia on sight. Cecilia has a special set of magic eyes that let her see the flow of power. But will that be enough to navigate a castle full of dangerous waifus and a marriage that she doesn't even understand? Get comfortable because the fate of humanity is officially in the hands of the world's most awkward honeymoon. Let's dive straight into the story, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
In a world that seems headed straight for destruction, a big question is being asked. Can a political marriage between the daughter of a duke and the demon king actually bring hope, or will it just lead to more despair? The story promises us plenty of battles and a cast of pretty girls, and apparently the fate of everything is now in the hands of one young woman. Our protagonist, Cecilia Reijou, makes her grand entrance. She introduces herself with a bow and explains that she has come to marry the Demon King for the sake of bringing peace between humanity and demonkind. But just as she says this, a massive crash echoes through the hall. The tension rises immediately. An angry maid named Lapance gets right in Cecilia's face, aggressively asking why someone like her is marrying the Demon King. Another girl named Maria tells Lapance to shut up and leave her alone. Cecilia thinks to herself that she was expecting murderous hostility right from the start, but it's still a lot to handle. Then, a woman who looks like a nun smiles and remarks that even this situation must be the will of the goddess. However, someone else calls her a fake and tells her not to pretend she actually serves the goddess. Nearby, a woman named Kiana, who has a spade symbol in her eye, gives a creepy laugh and finds the whole scene distasteful. We then meet Nefi and Kiana, two of the king's powerful subordinates. Nefi asks Kiana if they aren't all getting bored of doing nothing but fighting all the time. She suggests they have to find some way to pass the time. The narrator explains that ever since the sudden appearance of the Demon King and his 4 subordinates, humanity has been driven to the absolute brink of destruction. The devastation is everywhere. We see images of cities in ruins and a weeping angel statue, as the narrator reminds us that humanity has been pushed into a desperate corner. These subordinates are incredibly dangerous. Kiana is shown smiling while defeating soldiers, and Nefi sits calmly among the rubble of a falling city. Finally, we see a map showing that half of the kingdoms on the continent have already fallen. The kings of the remaining lands have gathered to discuss forming a unified army to oppose the Demon King, but the meeting is full of conflict. One king calls another a coward for losing hope, while another argues that they have no chance of victory anymore. He points out the terrifying fact that even the great hero Reaver was killed by the demons. One of the kings is shouting for someone to bring him more wine. However, his guard has to deliver some bad news, apologizing and explaining that they have completely run out, because that was the very last bottle. The king is furious, shouting out a curse in frustration. Another leader chimed in, saying he would much rather avoid any more bloodshed if possible. One man argued that they had no choice but to call for a truce just so humanity could survive, but someone else questioned if those demons would even be willing to talk to them. The frustrated king added that if the demons actually did accept a truce, all the money they spent on their armies and soldiers would end up being a total waste. Another leader wondered if they would be able to negotiate a deal that wasn't too bad for them, and the others around the table started to agree. Finally, one of the men looked up and said that all of this was giving him a big idea. We then see a flashback to Cecilia's home, where her father asked her what would happen if they secured peace through a marriage. Cecilia was completely shocked, asking if she really had to marry the Demon King. Her father explained that it was necessary for them to get better terms during the truce negotiations. He added that it would also make sure the demons didn't break whatever agreement they eventually came to. He told her very clearly that she must charm the Demon King, which left Cecilia confused, asking why it had to be her specifically. Her father went on to explain that their family name was mentioned when the leaders were discussing refined young ladies of high status who could be wed to the king. He also pointed out that she was chosen because she had been gifted with a special skill. We see a close-up of Cecilia's eye as she explained that her skill only allowed her to see the flow of magic power. She lamented that, since she wasn't good at fighting, the gift felt useless to her. Her father disagreed, saying there must be a reason she was granted that power. Cecilia then asked him how exactly he expected her to charm the Demon King. He suggested that she should simply try to get into the king's good graces through conversation, just like she would at a social party. But then he dropped a bombshell, telling her that if that didn't work, she should use her body to seduce him, claiming any man would fall for that eventually. Cecilia was horrified, shouting about her body in total shock. Her father then made a mean comment, saying her beauty still left a lot to be desired, so it would be better if she charmed him before things got to that point. Cecilia got angry and told him to excuse her, but then she noticed the look on his face. Her father started to cry, telling Cecilia that he was so sorry. He said it wasn't right that the adults were unable to do anything and had to burden her with such an unfair request. Cecilia comforted him, saying she had been prepared for something like this ever since she was born into the family. She told him it was an honor to be given such a duty and promised to do her absolute best to fulfill it. Back in the present, Cecilia told herself she would secure a future for humanity, no matter what. But Lopian shouted that she could not accept this. Lopian swung her massive weapon, screaming about why their great and beloved Demon King would ever have to marry a human woman. Cecilia remembered reading reports that Lopians loved the Demon King more than anyone else. She watched the swing of the weapon closely, using her special eyes to see what was happening. Cecilia could see that Lopians was channeling an incredible amount of magic power into her attack. She noted that a vast amount of magic was surging and swirling all around the angry maid. Lopians simply told her to die. Cecilia realized that if she were hit by a blow filled with that much magic, she would definitely be killed. However, she knew that if she let herself be scared or made a single mistake, it would mean the end for all of humanity. Standing her ground, Cecilia shouted that she was there to secure a lasting peace between humans and demons through her marriage. Lopians just yelled back in rage. Cecilia reminded her that this truce happened after both sides negotiated and reached an agreement. She asked Lopians if she really had the authority to overturn such a major deal. Lopians started to scream another response, but Cecilia told herself she couldn't show any weakness or back down. Cecilia looked back at the other girls and thought that even if she failed, all those girls who came with her as maidservants would be there to take over her mission. We see the determined but worried faces of the other human women. Lopians finally had enough, shouting that she was done with the talk. She called Cecilia a lowly human and told her to stop talking as she lunged forward. Lopians unleashed a devastating attack that smashed into the ground. Cecilia closed her eyes and apologized to her father, thinking that she wouldn't even get the chance to meet the Demon King. She felt like her life was finally about to end. But suddenly, a voice rang out through the hall, shouting for them to stop that right now.
Then, instead of Cecilia getting hit, this black ink-like substance splashes everywhere across the floor. Cecilia is absolutely stunned, staring at the dark magic swirling around her. We get these really mysterious close-ups of a dark crown, some sharp teeth, and long, flowing black hair intertwined with what look like giant tentacles. And then the big reveal. A small, calm girl with long black hair and a crown is standing right in the middle of all those tentacles. Cecilia is just staring up from the ground, totally speechless. Cecilia thinks to herself that the girl is actually really pretty and wonders who she could possibly be. Looking at the mess on the floor, she asks the girl if she was the one who did all that. The girl just gives a tiny nod and says, mm-hmm. When Cecilia asks why she would do such a thing, the girl simply explains that Lapience was the one who started the trouble and firmly states that bullying is just bad. Cecilia is completely baffled, wondering if the girl really saved her just because she hates bullying. She nervously tries to ask the girl who she is. Suddenly, we see the other subordinates laughing in the background, and Kiana tells Cecilia that the girl is their beloved leader, and the person Cecilia is destined to marry. Cecilia is in total shock. She asks if this girl is really the Demon King, and the story confirms it. This little girl is the Demon King. Cecilia is having a hard time wrapping her head around the fact that the Demon King is a girl. The girl just calmly confirms it with another mm-hmm. Cecilia is still in disbelief, but then the girl looks at her and asks what her name is. Cecilia manages to introduce herself as Cecilia Riented, but internally she's screaming for everyone to just hang on a second. Cecilia is completely panicking now. She wonders how in the world she is supposed to follow her father's orders and seduce another girl. Meanwhile, the Demon King stays perfectly calm and tells Cecilia that it is nice to meet her. The scene jumps to the very next day after their first meeting. Cecilia is literally screaming in her room. She's clutching her head and asking herself what she's supposed to do now. She wonders if her whole plan was doomed to fail from the very start. She complains that absolutely nobody told her the Demon King was a girl. But then, one of the other human girls who came with her speaks up. This girl tells Cecilia that she just needs to go through with it and sleep with her. Cecilia is horrified and asks her what on earth she's saying. The girl just shrugs it off, saying that's the kind of person she is, and that seduction is seduction regardless of gender. Cecilia tries to argue that they are both women, but the girl tells her not to worry about silly things like that, even if the Demon King is a woman and has a few thousand years on her. A woman named Helen suddenly pins our main girl, Cecilia, down on the bed. Helen jokes that she'll just drag Cecilia off to bed and make all her thoughts go pink. Cecilia is totally flustered, stuttering and asking what's going on, while weakly protesting that Helen can't do that. Helen just gives a little chuckle. Then Helen gets real close and asks Lady Cecilia if perhaps she'd like to be shown exactly how to charm someone. Now, we get some backstory on this mysterious lady. The narrator tells us that this is Helen, though nobody actually knows her real name. She came along as one of Cecilia's maidservants, but she's actually one of the backup brides meant to replace Cecilia if she fails the mission. As her fake name suggests, she's got a bit of a reputation. The other maids in the room are literally having heart palpitations watching this, and Cecilia is internally screaming for them not to just watch and help her, though then she kind of trails off. So, who is Helen? Well, the narrator explains that her claim to fame is using her incredible beauty to lead an iron-fisted prince and the future elite of a once prosperous country totally astray, which ended up bringing the entire kingdom to ruin. Talk about a femme fatale. She was actually sentenced to death for the crime of putting the kingdom at risk. However, the nation fell to the demon invasion before they could execute her, so she ended up stuck in a weird legal limbo in prison. Because humanity is in such deep trouble, she was released under some very strict conditions. Specifically, she had to be one of the brides sent to win over the Demon King. To make sure she behaves, she has to wear a special choker that has a remote-controlled death spell engraved on it. That is some serious leverage right there. Back in the room, Cecilia begs Helen to please cut it out. Helen acts all surprised, but Cecilia is thinking to herself that this woman is the one waiting in the wings if she fails. Helen brushes it off, saying that setting aside seduction, even between two women, Cecilia still has to find a way to win her over somehow. She reminds Cecilia that this is especially important after seeing the insane power displayed the day before. Cecilia realizes that she's right. With the Demon King's power, humanity wouldn't stand a chance. Suddenly, she hears a voice saying it's nice to meet her. We see Nephi, the octopus-like demon subordinate, who casually asks what a secure, lasting peace with marriage actually is. Cecilia is totally confused, asking for clarification. Nephi just blinks and asks what a marriage even is. Another subordinate, Kiana, groans that they have to start from the very beginning, noting that marriage must be a foreign concept to demons. Kiana takes over the explanation, saying that a marriage is just when two people decide they're going to get along and be nice to each other from now on. She adds that marrying for something, like for peace, means two countries send important people to wed to strengthen ties for mutual benefit. Kiana admits she thought it would be a fun way to pass some time, so she just went ahead and accepted the humans' proposal on on Neffy's behalf. Neffy is just like, oh, okay. Neffy then turns to Cecilia and asks if she will pass time with her. Cecilia repeats the phrase, pass time, in her head, telling herself to get it together. She knows if she lets her anger show, everything will be ruined. She stutters that of course she will, and then she gets bold, declaring that if Neffy marries her, she'll make sure Neffy is never bored again. Neffy thinks that sounds nice and starts twirling around. Cecilia thinks that Neffy seems happy, though it's honestly hard to read her expressions, remembering that Lopiance is still dead after that big explosion earlier. But then, boom, Lopiance is back to life. She's totally shocked, asking if she really came back to life. She starts sobbing and hiccuping. Cecilia is floored, thinking that it happened so fast that even with her magic eyes, she couldn't see the flow of magic. She notices that Lopiance has tears in her eyes and looks totally regretful, which is a huge change from how aggressive she was just a minute ago. Neffy looks at Lopiance and gives a chilling warning. If she's too mean to Cecilia, Neffy will kill her again and won't revive her for a whole week. Lopiance starts bowing frantically, apologizing and saying she understands. Cecilia is stuck on the word resurrection. She realizes the Demon King's power is truly extraordinary if she can just reverse death like that. She thinks that this turn of events is better than they could have hoped for. She tells herself that if she can win the king over, they can prevent more deaths and maybe even bring back everyone the demons have killed. She vows to win her over no matter what for the sake of humanity. Cecilia gets fired up, saying that there's finally a ray of hope for humanity, so she should stop worrying and take action. Helen tells her that it's her turn now, so she should go at it her own way. Cecilia announces she's off, but then she stops. She groans, realizing she's gotten lost in the castle again. Classic Cecilia. Finally, Lopiance catches up to her and yells at her to shut it. She swears she cannot accept this marriage. She demands to know how Cecilia can marry Her Majesty when she doesn't know a single thing about her. Cecilia actually stops and thinks that Lopiance has a point. She then turns it around and asks Lopiance how much she actually knows about Her Majesty. Lopiance starts wiggling with pure joy, gushing about how beautiful Her Majesty is. She says her face is far too pretty and her sleek black hair is simply wonderful. She goes on to say her eyes are like she sees right through you, and just her looking at her is more than enough to make her so happy. She adds that Her Majesty is also super strong and super kind, and since she even saved her life before, she might even call her a hero, that she's her reason for living and her light. Cecilia can only manage a weak right, thinking to herself that this is quite a huge change in attitude. She realizes that Lopiance must really love the Demon King, especially with the way her eyes are literally sparkling. But the mood shifts fast. Lopiance starts blushing and growling, shouting at Cecilia that she doesn't know anything about Her Majesty and therefore isn't qualified to marry her. Cecilia stands her ground, explaining that thanks to Lopiance, she was actually able to learn more about Her Majesty's personality and skills just yesterday. She then asks Lopiance why she might be threatening her and trying to chase her out, instead of simply killing her straight away. Lopiance is absolutely stunned by that question. Cecilia gets right in her face, saying that even if Lopiance were to kill her, Her Majesty has power over death itself. Because of that, she tells Lopiance that nothing she does will have any impact or influence on her at all. Lopiance is just fuming, letting out a low growl as they stare each other down surrounded by magical blades. Lopiance calls Cecilia scum, claiming Her Majesty only stepped in to save her on a whim yesterday. Cecilia thinks to herself that her guess was right and that Lopiance won't actually kill her. She decides she'd better go on the offensive and press this advantage. She tells Lopiance that since she did this yesterday and today, she wonders what she should say to Her Majesty about it. Then, with a fake sweet smile, she mentions she was just on her way to see her and asks if Lopiance would be ever so kind as to guide her to her chambers. Lopiance looks like she's about to lose it. Cecilia gives a polite bow, saying she is truly grateful for Lopiance's great honesty and kindness. Lopiance just screams that she'll kill her as Cecilia walks away. Cecilia thinks to herself how she never expected her experience from attending so many social events would come in handy like this. She lets out a huge sigh of relief as she finally gets away. She eventually finds herself standing before these massive doors, realizing she has reached the Demon King's chambers. She takes a moment to breathe in and breathe out, trying to calm her nerves. She knocks and asks if she may come in, identifying herself as Cecilia. When there's only silence, she thinks to herself that since humanity's future depends on this, she has to be assertive. She pushes the door open and announces that she's coming in. But when she gets inside, the scene is not what she expected. Her Majesty is a tangled mess of tentacles. She's making struggling noises, and Cecilia asks in total confusion if it's her. The Demon King looks over and asks Cecilia please not to stare because the whole situation is extremely embarrassing. Cecilia moves in to help, and we hear some struggling noises. The Demon King mentions that what Cecilia is doing actually tickles. Cecilia is huffing and puffing, apologizing and saying the tentacles are stiffer and stuck tighter than she thought they would be. The Demon King then tells Cecilia to do it harder. Cecilia nervously agrees, saying that here she comes.
Cecilia is straining with all her might, saying it's just way too tight, but then she loses her footing. There's a huge slam as they both go down, and Cecilia screams as she falls. She groans in pain, but when she opens her eyes, she realizes she is pinned right under the Demon King. They are both staring at each other in total shock. Cecilia is completely overwhelmed, thinking to herself about how close they are. She notices that Her Majesty's eyelashes are so long and thinks about how pretty she truly is. She can even feel the Demon King's breath on her face. Suddenly, she remembers Helen's bold advice that she just has to sleep with her to win her over. Cecilia's face turns bright red, and she internally screams that something like that is totally impossible for her. She starts overthinking everything, telling herself that since they only just met, they can't possibly do something like that. But then she wonders if the Demon King might be used to that kind of thing. She starts to think that maybe this is her big chance to save humanity. But the Demon King has to repeatedly call out to her to get her attention. She finally snaps out of it and accidentally shouts back a panicked yes. The Demon King looks a bit concerned and asks if Cecilia is okay. Cecilia stammers out a yes as she sits up. She rubs her head because it's throbbing, thinking that she must have hit it much harder than she initially thought. Suddenly, a tentacle gently reaches out toward her. The Demon King asks if her head hurts and says she is sorry, admitting that the whole accident was her fault. Cecilia is touched, thinking about how kind the Demon King is. But then she starts shaking her head frantically, wondering what she's thinking and worrying that she's the one being seduced now. She jumps up and shouts that this much is nothing for Her Majesty to concern herself with. The Demon King just gives a quiet, okay. Cecilia stands there watching her, remembering how the king protected her from Lapiense the day before and how she was just worried about her again. She stares at the Demon King and really begins to wonder if this person is truly the same Demon King who has been destroying all of humanity. The Demon King just looks back at her with a calm, silent expression.